It is a desperately sad fact that in these times, homophobic and transphobic hate remains overwhelming, vocal, and rampant in many sections of the media and society. This is a hate that feeds into social attitudes, social values, and social perceptions. That such hate is tolerated in what we think is our democracy is quite simply bizarre. At the very least, democracy is the freedom to be ourselves. It's the freedom to be who we feel we are. It's also the freedom to allow others to be themselves, even if they differ from us. So why is so much aggression and hate directed at sexual diversity groups? Why are they contemptuously dismissed as woke or left-wing when they try to defend themselves? Have governments, media and society understood anything about the democratic rights of these groups and individuals in our civilization? Well, here to help me unpack all of that is Charles Neal. Charles, welcome. Can I start by asking you, every day, I was talking about the media just then, the media has a news story about conflict. And I'm told by people who understand these terms, between the TERFs and the trans. Now, for the benefit of people who don't understand all this, could you just explain who the hate exists between?
Yes, unfortunately it does. The TERFs is an insulting acronym for a group of radical feminists who are arguing that males cannot become female and they cannot invent female-only spaces, which has taken 50 years for women to carve out for themselves. And trans is a sort of portmanteau term for a whole number of different gender minorities who don't identify as heterosexual or gay.
Yeah. So especially for our heterosexual audience, I mean, those that are with us, is there a difference between gender and sexuality?
Yes, and very often unhelpfully confused. Yes, and between sex and gender and sexuality. First of all, there's biological sex, that is our hormonal makeup at birth. And even that is not as simple as we've always wanted it to be. Most people are assigned a gender at birth on a fairly arbitrary examination by the surgeons, who just hand the baby to the parents and say it's a boy or it's a girl, as if those are straightforward and radically different things, when actually human sexuality and our hormonal makeup is actually on a spectrum, so that very few people are entirely male or entirely female. There's quite a range of what we've called male masculinities and femininities. So that's biological sex. That's the sex we're actually given in our biology. And then there's our gender identity. That is what my sense of myself is in our cultural system in terms of being male or female or non-binary or bi or trans. So that's my own internal sense of who I am, which may not match with my biology or my given gender at all. And then there's sexual orientation, which is the direction of my attraction to others, romantically, affectionately, sexually.
So I was just going to say, at what stage can you reliably tell where you fit into that? Because it's an enormous selection of what you might be, could be, should be, but how do you know and when?
I think I'm more interested in why do you need to know and when. Because I think one of the greatest things I've spent my time, as an educator trying to deal with is our intense desire to label things as neatly as we possibly can. This is a legacy from the Age of Reason in basically, where we categorized everything that lived, and including aspects of human life. And unfortunately, the world, nature. Look at Attenborough's programs, and you discover how massively varied and how intriguingly different. One butterfly is from another, or one deer from another, and so are we. But we have this need to fix each other in the mistaken belief that if we can name and fix someone, we have control over them in some way. I know who you are. You're a lesbian, and I know what a lesbian is.
The trouble is, there are people, they're often very prominent, well-known people who, I'm thinking perhaps of somebody like J.K. Rowling, who's had a hell of a last year, where she said, look, women are women, they have all the sexual makeup of such, they have periods, they can have babies, and for saying so, I mean, which seems like quite reasonable common sense to some of us, but she's been absolutely vilified. I mean, people have been around her house smashing her windows. Why is this?
Well, have you noticed that it's not just about sex and gender that this acrimony and aggression is rising in our culture and other Western industrial cultures? And I think the pandemic has made everybody in a state of agitation and anxiety, almost fearful of getting on a bus or meeting other people, which is new and a constant anxiety for us. But we also have, there are malign forces. The present cabinet, some of our media, the Daily Mail in particular, the Sun, the Star, and right-wing forces in our society have a vested interest in setting groups against one another, partly as a distraction from what they're up to, which, as we know, involves quite a great deal of corruption and self-interest, and partly because their hold on power, because a lot of sex and gender is really to do with power. People think it's all to do with erotics, but it isn't. A lot of it is to do with power and control. And so if you can set people against one another, the cabinet's actually announced, some of them have actually announced a war on woke, including even dear old things like the BBC,
Yeah, well, not surprisingly, may I say. But can we just go back to get to people who are gay? And I think it's interesting and encouraging that so many more people in the world understand why gay rights were fought for, why people have them, why people can marry, and all the things that the rights they've established. They understand that, I think, much more than they did 10 years ago. But why do they hate trans, non-binary and gender fluid people so vehemently?
They, who's they?
The gay lobby.
Oh, the gay lobby. Well, things evolve. Gayness itself is a fairly recent concept. It was only sort of invented as a separate kind of person in about 1850, when sexologists started categorizing people. Before that, people were sexual or they weren't, and they had a range of ways of expressing that. So I suppose one of the things that happens is that when minority groups have a long, hard war for rights, they sometimes go to the other pole and start defending themselves against perceived encroachments on their rights, if you like.
Uh-huh.
We've seen the same thing with black power. And I would say, and I don't wish to insult any of my feminist friends about this, sometimes you see that happening in feminism too, because the struggle has been so long and so hard in Welsh nationalism,
They don't like the new guys on the block, really. They want to take them on, or they're a bit fed up with the attention they're getting.
Yes, and of course, if you're defining yourself as gay, you're probably defining yourself as gay and not straight, i.e., not heterosexual. So, in a way, you're using heterosexuality as a way of defining yourself as not that, and then people come along and say, "But those are myths anyway. There isn't such a thing as straight and gay. That
No,
we're all on
we're all
continuums."
borderline. Yes, on continuums.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
here
I
at...
suppose
Yeah, sorry.
it's the difference between off the peg identities and tailor-made ones.
Yes, indeed. Now, here at In These Times, we do care very much about people's mental health, which is why we're having this conversation. And as a psychotherapist, you must see the unhappiness that this brings, an alarming jump in the suicide rate between really amongst people who can't stand being vilified so much or don't know who they are, or maybe it's put upon them too young. I just wonder what your view is on that, really.
I think it's tragic. We've just had a case in my own life. My best friend's nephew came out at Christmas, 13-year-old, came out to his family and said that he wanted to be non-binary and he wanted to be known by female names. And then a month later committed suicide.
Oh, God, no. How really sad.
That, what a waste of opportunity, of life force. When that person today would have had available a lot more help than ever before, and support and community. But of course, it's a lonely place to be, and a lonely place to be in a family and in a culture and in a religion, maybe.
Well, this is going to lead me on to what is done for people like that. But can I just ask you, there is, as I understand it in Parliament, a reform of the Gender Recognition Act, and which is going through. There's a bill which, again, seems to indicate to me they want to demedicalise, and they want to change the rules about people living in an acquired gender for 2 years. In fact, I'm wondering if the government's done good on this one. What is your feeling about this?
It's a result of a lot of pressure from our sexual minority communities. And it is good. It is very good if we stop medicalizing sexual experience, really, altogether. But certainly, most of the trans people I know are not spending their time on sexual politics. They're in families, they have jobs, they're getting on with their lives. They're not in a woke war themselves. These things are trumped up, and yes, there are extremists in all camps. But yeah, it's a good thing. It's been incredibly bad for people's mental health, the way that we have allowed trans and non-binary people to transition. It's been, you've had to prove that you live. If you were born male and you want to transition to female, you have to prove that you live as a woman. The way that you be a woman is in the psychiatric examinations that they keep having on the way through this process. The way that the psychiatric community regards womanness is a way that most of my female friends wouldn't recognize. You're supposed to keep your legs crossed at all times. You're not supposed to wear trousers. You're supposed to be interested in makeup and frocks and stuff. And it's a ridiculous out view of what a woman is, even. And then you don't get psychotherapy as part of this process.
Well, we're going to come on to that because, of course, when you started the pink therapy, that the intention was to get therapists to stop being so, I was going to say bigoted, but so they broaden their view and could really help people.
Absolutely. Well, when I first, I'd been in education in London, fairly radical education for secondary school and then adults and then university. And we were making amazing strides forward in terms of people's rights and equity and and minority groups and all that stuff. And then when I started to train as a psychotherapist, I was absolutely appalled at the backwardness of it. Of course, most psychotherapeutic teaching and text at that stage, this was the very early 80s, at that stage, most of those texts came from the 50s and 60s. Most of the people who were training us had trained themselves 20 years before. This is always the danger, isn't it? The time lag in moving forward.
So it's getting better, is it, Charles? It's getting better?
It is getting better, but it's still not, as you said in your introduction, it's shocking, really, that it's still not a requirement for psychotherapy training that people acquaint themselves with minority experience, whether it be racial or sexual or gender or what. It's not a requirement. So you can glide through your psychotherapy training and say, well, I live in, deepest Cornwall or something. I never meet a trans person. I never meet a black person.
Yeah. I think, we mentioned the media, and of course they have a lot to blame, as usual, thrown at their door. I mean, there are some appalling stories this week. I don't know what you think about this, where the chief executive of the charity Educate and Celebrate has told teachers they should be moving towards a gender-free model, and that should involve pupils dropping Mr. and Mrs. and refer to staff as teacher. And she advised them to dispense with terms such as boys, girls, son and mother, replacing them with gender-neutral words like pupil, students, child and parent. Is this really necessary?
I don't think what you're describing is necessary. And again, I'm afraid, Chrissie, I'm not certain I think it's true. I know the research project that the Daily Mail is interpreting in that way. And it's actually a very long project which has actually advised teachers to start to become aware, in just the way we've just been talking about psychotherapists, to start to become aware that the language that they use in the classroom is disadvantageous to certain people in the room. Because if a child, like the one that I just told you about who committed suicide, keeps being referred to as he or keeps being called a boy when that isn't their experience. Social services have been trying to deal with this for years, with teachers talking about mum and dad when a lot of the children in their classroom don't live with mum and dad, and they don't have a mum and dad. And it's upsetting.
But if you ask a lot of, I hardly dare use the expression Middle England, if you ask the ordinary bloke in the street if he understands that, many, many people would say, well, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with mum and dad, and it always has been.
Yeah. This is our feet against the door jam. We don't want to go there. We don't want to go through. We don't want these changes. We want things as they were when we grew up.
Well, how do you get these changes through? I think this is without it causing a great deal of mental upset to all those who desperately need change, who want to live their life fully as the people they want to be. How are you going to do that? I mean, the government are trying with this bill, but I don't know how you change attitudes.
It's a very gradual process, as you must have lived it, and I have. I mean, when I was first sexual in the 60s, as a young man, all of my relationships were illegal. Now I'm married, and I've been male years. We're parents and we're grandparents and we're stalwarts in our community. I don't think anyone objects to us.
Well, I mean, you're for the people who don't know your past. I mean, you are particularly interesting in this respect because you were married to a woman, but you knew pretty early on that that was not a great idea because you were gay. But then you went and you married a man, and you've been happy ever since. But I mean, that's not an easy passage for people. It's a painful process.
Very, yes. And obviously it was painful for me and for my wife and other people along the way. But now we've got through to a new place. In a way, we're a microcosm of what society is trying to do, or what society should be trying to do. Because now it doesn't matter. You know, my partner and I have dinner with my ex-wife and her partner. All of it seems, all this woke wars nonsense seems a million miles away from us.
Well, another bit of nonsense you'll dislike intensely, Charles, is the story this week which was on all the radio news, is that a 6-year-old child in a classroom, he was sitting next to another 6-year-old boy who was wearing a dress. So he said to the teacher, "Why is that boy wearing a dress?" And the teacher went to his parents and said, "I think you've got problems with this boy. I think he's transphobic at 6."
Well, it's nonsense, isn't
it?
Yes. Again, if that happened, it's absolutely ridiculous. Having been a teacher, children ask everything, and they're entitled to, and that should be the beginning of a conversation. And if we all had conversations with one another about these things, rather than took up positions, then advance would be a lot less painful.
So if you could make a prediction for us, where are we going to be with this whole subject in 10 years' time? Will we continue to make progress as the gay lobby did? Will people become more accustomed with the fact people want to be what they want to be and will the media stop being so heavy?
Well, there are encouraging signs. The latest the government social attitude survey has shown, for example, that the percentage of people who now think that gay marriage and parenthood and so on is perfectly acceptable has gone right up to, I think, about 65% of the population think that's fine. It used to be something like 15% 20 years ago.
That's good.
And the same is happening with gender, in that social attitudes are changing and people are saying, people were asked where they were on a continuum between absolute heterosexuality and some other notional thing like absolute gayness or something. And a very large number of people do not now identify as 100% heterosexual. They say they haven't tried other relationships. They might, they're interested or they're not interested, and they don't judge others about it. They have friends who are a variety of. So I think younger people are. It's something that you said earlier about how difficult it is for Middle England, to have these changes as they experience it, and as the media puts it, forced upon us, when actually they're not forced upon us. They're part of our community's struggle to be heard.
Indeed. And Charles, I think the final point I would like you to just speak about is how we get through. I mean, if you go to your average GP now and you try and express some of this stuff about what you see as maybe a problem with your gender, you're not sure where you are, I just suspect you get blanked. I don't think anybody knows what to do with you. Maybe offers you some pills or something. And as there is no therapy on the state, there's just CBT. So what are people to do who are going through really tough times with their mental health?
Well, I would suggest the Pink Therapy register, online register, is a collection of several hundred therapists and counsellors who have made themselves aware of sex and gender issues and trained specifically in it, and have positive attitudes to supporting people wherever on those spectrums they are. Now, some of the therapists specialize in some sexualities and some genders, but it's a reliable register, because you're right. When you go to sexual health services, when you go to psychiatric services, when you go to medical situations, there is no real education or understanding about these matters. I remember somebody telling me that they went to their local sexual health clinic, and the woman said, they said, "Oh, why aren't there any leaflets and information here about HIV?" And they said, "Well, because we keep that for Thursday evening when the gay people come."
Unbelievable. Well, there you are. I'm very glad for the pink therapy. And as you said, please, anybody who feels like this, who is feeling at risk, go to that website and see if you can talk to someone.
And be careful who you talk to. Try people out. You should have a sense of safety and being properly heard and not judged. But you should also be having a bit of challenge about what's going on for you, because it's useless if they just keep saying yes, yes, that's yes.
Absolutely. That's great advice. All right.
One of the other things maybe that we should mention is that the reason I brought out my last book, which is called Marrying Kind, about gay and bi men who married women, was to challenge some of the binary notions that you're either gay or straight. If you're straight, you should marry a woman and have children. If you're gay, you shouldn't be married to a woman. You should, And the book is 10 stories, each with an entirely different outcome.
Yes. Yes. Okay. The Marrying Kind. Definitely one to read. Charles, thank you so much for being with me. This has been really interesting, and I'm sure it's helped a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.